Ladies and gentlemen, the woman he just called his wife is actually his secretary, and she was paid $250,000 to be here today. The sharp accusation cut short the moment when everything should have been decided. In the conference room at the top of the world overlooking Marina Bay, Mason Hayes was all but certain to secure a $500 million deal. Beside him, the woman the key investor had just called so beautiful his fake wife. Scarlett played the part of her life to perfection. The tension finally eased, a smile of relief forming on Mason's lips, just before the door swung open and his world came crashing down in the most public and humiliating way. The atmosphere in the conference room on the 57th floor of the Marina Bay Financial Center could be described in 2 words: expensive and tense. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of Singapore, cargo ships sailing leisurely across the straits, the iconic gardens by the bay glowing in the tropical sun. But inside, no one paid any attention to the multi-million-dollar view. All eyes were on Mason Hayes. Mason, CEO of Innovate Dynamics, was on the final slides of the most important presentation of his life. His voice was steady and confident, echoing throughout the polished oak-paneled room. Every graph he showed, every number he tossed, was a building block leading to a $500 million investment from Reliant Capital. Sitting next to him, as still as a statue, was Scarlett Jones. To the world, she was Mrs. Hayes, dressed in a designer navy silk gown, her honey-colored hair neatly pulled back into a bun. She exuded a calm elegance. Her hands were clasped perfectly in her lap, the faux diamond ring on her ring finger glinting just right in the recessed light. She was the embodiment of stability, the solid backing that any traditional investor would crave in a business partner. Only Scarlett and Mason knew that the ring was bought in a hurry at a jewelry store at Changi Airport, and that their relationship was bound by a $250,000 contract that was safely stored in a hotel safe. And that's why, Mason concluded, his voice ringing with certainty, Innovate Dynamics isn't just an investment in technology, it's an investment in the future. He finished. There was silence. Mr. Lim Wei, the 60-something chairman of Merlion Capital, the most powerful man in the room, nodded slightly. He was an old-school man who believed in handshakes over emails, in personalities over numbers on paper. His keen eyes flicked from Mason to Scarlett, and a small, satisfied smile played on his lips. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes," Mr. Lim said, his voice deep and weighty. "Very impressive. Your wife must be very proud." Scarlett smiled slightly, a smile she had practiced hundreds of times in the mirror. "I always trusted his vision. Mr. Lim..." Mason felt the knot in his chest finally loosen. They were close. The deal was almost in hand. But just then, a sharp sound cut through the relaxed atmosphere. Click. The heavy teak door to the conference room swung open without warning. All eyes turned to the door. Marcus Thorne stood there, wearing a hideously tailored Tom Ford suit and a blinding smirk. He was the CEO of TechCorp, Mason's arch-rival, and the Viper who had once been his best friend. "Excuse me for interrupting," Marcus said, his voice dripping with insincerity. "I know this is a private meeting, but there is a truth that I believe Mr. Lim and the esteemed board members need to know before they sign anything." The building's security rushed forward, but Mr. Lim held up a hand to stop them. Curiosity overcame politeness. "Mr. Thorne," Mr. Lim said, his voice cold. "You have a minute." Marcus strode into the room, his Italian leather shoes clicking defiantly on the marble floor. He didn't look at Mason. Instead, he turned toward the investors, and his venomous gaze settled on Scarlett. He raised a finger, pointing straight at her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus declared, his voice ringing with glee, "I am here to tell you that Mason Hayes is a liar." The whole room fell into deathly silence. The woman sitting next to him, Marcus continued, emphasizing each word, whom he introduced as the beautiful Mrs. Hayes, is not Mason Hayes' wife. She is a fraud. She is his assistant. This entire marriage is a blatant show designed to deceive you. Mr. Lim. Time seemed to stop. Scarlett felt her blood freeze. She could hear her heart pounding in her chest, a deafening sound in the absolute silence. Everyone's eyes, from the Singapore investors to their assistants, were on her, scrutinizing, skeptical, and judgmental. Mr. Lim's usually pleased face turned icy. He narrowed his eyes, staring at Mason, then at Scarlett. His gaze was no longer filled with admiration, but with razor-sharp suspicion. Innovate Dynamics' $500 million future, Mason's lifelong career, and Scarlett's dignity, all hung by a thread, on the brink of total collapse. 4 weeks ago, the air in Mason's loft office in Austin, Texas, smells not of Singapore's humidity and betrayal, but of burnt coffee and despair. He had dinner with Lee and Tan at the Lantern Bar, said David Chen, Mason's lawyer and only trusted friend, as he tossed a stack of documents onto the glass coffee table. Marcus is whispering to them that you're an unstable player, a lone wolf, all business, no personal life. He says you're a big risk for a long-term investment. Mason rubbed his temples. That's baseless talk, but it works. Mason, David insisted. You know Mr. Lim? He's an old-school Asian, family first, stability is everything. On the video call last week, he asked about your family 3 times. It wasn't a social question, it was a test. Mason stood up and paced in front of the window overlooking the Austin skyline. He had spent a decade building Innovate Dynamics from a cramped garage into a multi-million-dollar company. He had sacrificed everything: relationships, vacations, and a marriage that had ended in acrimony when his ex-wife ran off with a real estate agent who enjoyed life more than he did. His former partner, Marcus Thorne, had stolen his core idea and founded TechCorp, a rival who had relentlessly sought to undermine him. This investment was more than money, it was recognition, a final victory. So what am I supposed to do? David, send him a financial statement proving I don't party every night, Mason sneered. David was silent for a long moment. Then he blurted out an idea so crazy it almost made sense. No, you have to show him what he wants to see. You need to show up in Singapore. With a wife. Mason stopped, turning to look at David as if he had grown a second head. Are you kidding me? You want me to hire an actor? That's unethical. That's cheating. It's strategy. David argued, his voice urgent. Marcus is playing dirty. We have to be smarter. This isn't about corporate finance. This is about presenting an image of stability. Just 5 days. Mason, a trip, a loving wife by your side. That will put all the Marcus rumors to rest and give Mr. Lim the reassurance he needs. Mason protested vehemently. The thought disgusted him. But as the night wore on and he sat alone in his empty office, despair began to gnaw at his pride. He thought of the 300 employees who had placed their trust in him. He thought of the years of hard work. He could not let it all fall apart because of the lies of a traitor, but who he couldn't think of anyone in his small social circle he could trust with such a secret. His eyes drifted involuntarily to the glass wall of the office. Outside, under the dim fluorescent lights, Scarlett Jones was still sitting at her desk, reorganizing her schedule for tomorrow. Scarlett. She had worked for him for 5 years, since the company was in shambles. She was efficient, smart, and fiercely private. She had seen his tantrums, his moments of despair, and his rare triumphs. She knew more about the company than anyone else, and most importantly, she was incredibly loyal. A bold and dangerous decision formed in Mason's mind. The next day, he called her into his office. Scarlett entered, notebook and pen in hand, ready to take notes. She wore a simple white blouse and black pencil skirt, her usual efficient uniform. Sit down, Scarlett, Mason said, his voice a little odd. He laid out the situation frankly, not hiding his desperation or the risks involved. He talked about Marcus, about Mr. Lim, about David's crazy idea. Scarlett listened, her face expressionless except for intense concentration. But Mason could see her fingers tighten around the pen. When he finished speaking, there was silence. Scarlett just looked at him. And you want me to play your wife? She asked, her voice ominously flat. "It's a business proposal," Mason said quickly, feeling awkward. "It's strictly professional. A special employment contract for an important assignment. 5 days in Singapore. Once the deal is signed, you'll receive $250,000. He knew it was a life-changing number. He knew from passing conversations that her parents were struggling financially, that they had a huge amount of medical debt. That amount of money could solve it all. Scarlett stood up. She didn't look at the money. She looked straight at Mason, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before, a combination of hurt and steely determination. "I need time to think." Scarlett couldn't sleep that night. Part of her felt violated. He saw her as nothing more than a tool, a solution to his problems. But another part, the part she had kept hidden for 5 years, was stirred. The silent affection she had for her distant, brilliant, lonely boss was driving her. She wanted to help him. She wanted to see him triumph over the man who had betrayed him. The next morning, she walked into Mason's office. "I agree," she said, "but on 2 conditions. First, everything must be strictly professional. We are partners in this mission, nothing more, nothing less. Second, if at any time I feel my dignity has been compromised, the agreement will be terminated immediately." Mason nodded, feeling a sudden sense of relief. Agreed. The next 3 weeks were a series of strange and awkward events. They began their marriage training. They had to construct a fictional love story. They decided that they met at a coffee shop in Austin, that he was attracted to her intellect when he heard her discussing a book with a friend. The first movie they saw together was Casablanca. Their shared favorite food was Italian food. These fabrications begin to intertwine with the truth. During a biographical practice session, Scarlett learns that Mason was a great guitar player in college. Mason discovers that Scarlett has an irrational fear of moths and dreams of one day opening a small bookstore by the sea. A bookstore Mason asked during a practice dinner at a fancy restaurant. "I thought you were into the tech world." Scarlett shrugged, fiddling with her napkin. "I love the efficiency of technology, but I love the quiet of stories, a place where people can find an escape, a peace." Mason looked at her, really looked at her. He realized that in the past 5 years, he had only seen the perfect executive assistant. He had never seen Scarlett, the woman with simple dreams and a deep soul. The shopping trip was another turning point. Mason took Scarlett to the most expensive boutiques. He was used to seeing her in conservative business suits. But when she emerged from the dressing room in a sapphire blue silk evening gown that hugged a figure he had never noticed before, he was stunned. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, and her shy smile made her look younger and more radiant. It's beautiful," he stuttered, feeling his throat dry. "Is it CEO wife-like?" Enough, she asked, a hint of humor in her voice. "It's more than that," he said, his voice lower than he intended. In that moment, as they stood in the bright lights of the shop, the line between boss and employee, between act and real, began to blur dangerously. Scarlett felt her cheeks burn under his gaze. Mason felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a genuine, unadulterated attraction. They learned to touch each other naturally, a handshake as they walked, an arm around her waist. At first, each contact sent jolts of shock through both of them, but gradually it became easier, almost instinctive. On the 19-hour flight to Singapore, Scarlett fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, instead of pushing her away. Mason gently adjusted her travel pillow and sat for hours, listening to her steady breathing in the faint scent of jasmine in her hair. When they landed in Singapore and stepped into the luxurious penthouse at the Fullerton Bay Hotel, the reality of the drama set in. They had separate bedrooms, but in public they were a married couple. The night before their fateful meeting, they stood on the balcony, looking out at the sparkling lights of Marina Bay. "Are you scared?" Mason asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," Scarlett admitted, "but not because of the meeting. I'm afraid I'm doing a great job of this role." Mason turned to look at her. In the moonlight, Her eyes were filled with complicated emotions. He wanted to say something, to admit that he felt the same way, that playing her husband was the happiest and most honest time he had had in years. But he didn't. The contract and the $250,000 were like an invisible wall between them. "You're an excellent worker. Scarlett," was all he said. "We'll finish this tomorrow." Something in her eyes went blank. She just nodded. "Yes, sir." And now, here they are. Back in the conference room where hell had broken loose. Marcus Thorne's accusations still hung in the thick air. "She's his assistant," Marcus repeated, enjoying every moment of the chaos he had created. Mason's mind was racing. Deny partial admittance. Pull Scarlett out of here. All options were doomed. He felt a cold sweat run down his spine. He was about to open his mouth to say something that might salvage the situation when he felt a light touch. It was Scarlett's hand, resting on his on the table. A gentle touch, but a powerful one. It did not tremble. It was steady. It said, "Let me..." And then, to the astonishment of Mason and everyone else, Scarlett slowly stood up. She didn't look at Marcus. She didn't look at Mason. She looked straight at Mr. Lim, the man with the power to decide their fate. The initial panic in her eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying calm. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice clear and crisp, echoing throughout the silent room. "Technically, you are correct." A murmur of surprise ran through the room. Mason stared at her, unable to believe what he had just heard. What the hell was she doing, Mason and I? Scarlett continued, without hesitation, "Don't have a marriage license." Marcus sneered. He had won. But Scarlett wasn't finished. She held Mr. Lim's gaze. But he was wrong about everything else that mattered. He was wrong about calling me a cheater, and he was dead wrong about thinking he understood the nature of my relationship with Mason Hayes. She took a deep breath. Love, Mr. Lim, doesn't always start with a piece of paper from City Hall. True love, and more importantly, a lasting partnership, is built on other things. It's built on loyalty, on trust, and on mutual respect that has stood the test of time. She turned slightly, facing the investors. I've been with Mason for 5 years and 2 months. I've been there when the company had 3 employees and a rundown rented office. I've seen him work 18 hours a day, not for the money, but because he truly believed in creating something that could change the world. I've seen him turn down lucrative acquisition offers because he didn't want to fire a single employee. Her eyes sharpened as she glanced at Marcus. And yes, I was there when the person he once called his best friend stole his intellectual property and tried to ruin him from behind. I was there to make those 3 coffees, to review those contracts, and to remind him that his integrity was worth more than all the dirty tricks in the world. She turned back to Mr. Lim, her voice soft but still powerful. So, yes, we don't have a marriage certificate. Perhaps our marriage isn't legally recognized, but our partnership, sir, has been tested by fire. Our loyalty is not an act. My devotion to his vision is real. And our trust in each other is absolute. That's the stability you're looking for, Mr. Lim, a foundation that can't be shaken by cheap gossip or opportunists. She finished her speech and slowly sat down, back straight, chin held high. The room was completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, the smirk on his face frozen into an ugly look of astonishment. He had come here with a bomb, but Scarlett had just turned it into a dazzling fireworks display in honor of the very person he had intended to destroy. Mr. Limway said nothing for a long minute. He looked at Scarlett, not with suspicion, but with deep admiration, almost respect. He was a seasoned businessman. He had built his empire on his ability to read people, and he had seen something more valuable than a perfect marriage on paper, unwavering loyalty, and sharp intelligence. He had seen a true partner. Finally, he turned to Marcus Thorne, and his face was expressionless. "Security," he said coldly. "Please escort Mr. Thorne out. TechCorp's business contracts with our subsidiaries will be reviewed tomorrow morning." Marcus's face turned from red to white. "But, Mr. Lim, I'm just trying to tell the truth. You have told the facts, Mr. Thorne," said Mr. Lim, rising and buttoning his vest. "But this woman has told the truth. There is a big difference. Now, go." As two large security guards escorted a stuttering Marcus out of the room, Mr. Lim turned back to Mason. He held out his hand. "Mr. Hayes," he said, a genuine warm smile on his face for the first time. "You are a very, very lucky man. You have found a partner worth more than gold." He looked at Scarlett and nodded respectfully. "It is a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." He turned back to his assistants. "Merlion Capital is honored to partner with Innovate Dynamics. Let's drop the contract. We'll sign it before dinner. Later, in the hotel penthouse." The door closed behind them, cutting them off from the outside world. Mason and Scarlett stood in the middle of the lavish living room, but neither of them could really see the luxurious furniture or the breathtaking view. They just looked at each other. The professional awkwardness, the invisible boundaries they tried to maintain, all evaporated in the flames of the conference room. Mason was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward, and this time, when he took Scarlett's hand, it was no longer part of the act. It was an irresistible urge. "Scarlett," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. You didn't just save my company, you saved me." He looked deep into her eyes, and everything he'd wanted to say on the balcony last night came pouring out. "These past weeks, playing at being your husband, it's been real. For me, it's been the happiest, most honest time I've had in years. I've realized that I don't just admire my assistant. I don't just appreciate my business partner." He paused, his heart pounding. "I loved you, Scarlett. I loved your intelligence, your strength, and your dream of a little bookstore by the sea." Scarlett looked at him, her eyes glistening with tears. Tears of relief, of happiness, of a love she thought would never be returned. Mason let go of her hand and walked over to the table where he had left his briefcase. He pulled out an envelope. It contained the $250,000 contract they had signed in Austin. Before Scarlett's eyes, he slowly tore it in half, then into quarters, and dropped the pieces of paper to the floor. "I don't want to pay for a fake wife," he said firmly, his voice filled with certainty. "I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of a real wife. If you give me the chance." That was all Scarlett needed to hear. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his neck and pulling him close. "I love you too, Mason," she whispered before their lips met. There was nothing theatrical about that kiss. It was passionate, deep, and full of promise. It was the end of a play and the beginning of a true love story. It was not a contract signed, but a covenant sealed between two hearts that had finally found each other in the midst of a storm. 1 year later, Innovate Dynamics, heavily funded by Merlion Capital, has become a tech giant. Just as Mason envisioned, Marcus Thorne's Tech Corp has lost several big deals and is struggling to stay afloat. Mason Hayes and Scarlett Jones, now the real Scarlett Hayes, were married in a small, intimate ceremony at a vineyard in the Texas Hill Country. David Chen was best man, and he gave a witty speech about the most unique employment contracts in legal history. The story ends when they return to Singapore, not for work, but to celebrate their first wedding anniversary. They stand on the balcony of the Fullerton Bay Hotel, overlooking the sparkling Marina Bay. This place is no longer a symbol of anxiety and deception. It is where their story truly begins. Mason hugged Scarlett from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. The genuine diamond ring on her finger sparkled under the city lights. "I still can't believe your speech that day," he whispered in her ear. Scarlett smiled, resting her head against his chest. "I'm just telling the truth. That's the most wonderful truth I've ever heard," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. They stood there in silence. Two people who had started with a carefully calculated lie, but had ended up finding the deepest truth of their lives. The act was over, but their love story had only just begun. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you love this story, don't forget to click like to support the channel. Share this story with family and friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories.